Pushed into darkness and left for dead, a blind, pregnant woman defies the impossible. When all seems lost, a mysterious horse appears, changing her fate forever. The wind blew strongly against the cliffs of Newport that morning, when Emily Morgan ran her fingers over the polished surface of the marble railing on the main staircase. Her steps were silent, measured with the precision of someone who knows every inch of the place where she works, even without ever having seen it. The Anderson mansion stood imposingly over the sea, but for Emily, it was a labyrinth of sounds and textures that she decoded with mastery. "Emily, don't forget Mr. Howard's office. He specifically mentioned that he wants everything impeccable for this afternoon's meeting," said Dorothy, the housekeeper, with her usual tone of urgency. "No problem, I'm heading there now," replied Emily, adjusting her apron over her belly that was beginning to show signs of her 5-month pregnancy. She slid her hand along the wall until she found the doorknob to the office. The smell of fine wood and old books invaded her nostrils as soon as she entered, an environment that she associated with the intimidating presence of her employer, Howard Anderson, a businessman feared and respected throughout the country. "How are you feeling today?" asked Lucy, another employee who entered the room carrying a tray. "I'm well, the baby has been calmer," Emily responded with a slight smile. "Have you told Mr. Howard about—" Lucy left the question hanging in the air, looking at her colleague's belly. "Not officially yet, but I'm sure he already knows. Nothing escapes Mr. Anderson." The two exchanged complicit looks, even knowing that Emily couldn't see them. The silence that followed spoke louder than words. Working for Howard Anderson guaranteed sustenance, but came with the constant weight of surveillance and the calculated coldness of the employer. While organizing the papers on the desk, Emily felt something unusual. A partially open drawer, a fallen envelope. Her trained fingers immediately noticed that something was out of place. Howard was too meticulous to leave anything like this. "Lucy, could you bring me another cleaning cloth?" "This one is too damp for the mahogany," asked Emily, waiting until she heard her colleague's footsteps move away. With her heart racing, she felt the envelope. The paper was thick, of superior quality. When she opened it, her fingers slid over, textures of official seals and stamps, and then something made her blood freeze, a name in relief repeated several times. Richard Morgan, her uncle. Impossible, she whispered to herself. Richard had disappeared years ago, without leaving. No trace. He had worked as an accountant for Howard before vanishing, and the family never received convincing explanations. Just empty condolences and a compensation that seemed more like hush money. At that moment, she heard firm footsteps approaching down the hallway, the unmistakable walk of Howard Anderson. Quickly, she put the envelope in her pocket and returned to cleaning, pretending everything was normal. "Good morning, Emily." The deep and controlled voice echoed through the office, sending a shiver down her spine. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she responded, maintaining the serene tone she always used with him. "How is the pregnancy going?" he asked, surprising her with the direct mention of the subject she had not yet officially discussed with him. It's all fine, sir. I was going to talk to you about it this week." Howard approached, his woody perfume filling the room. Emily could feel his gaze analyzing her, as if he could see through her, as if he knew exactly what she had just done. "I'm happy to hear that. We need to ensure that you have all the necessary comfort. After all, you are a valuable employee." The deliberate hesitation in the last word made Emily squeeze the cleaning cloth between her fingers. There was something in his tone, a veiled threat that she couldn't completely decipher. "Thank you, sir," was all she managed to reply. "Continue with your work. We'll talk more about your situation later." When the door closed and the footsteps moved away, Emily finally breathed. The weight of the envelope in her pocket seemed to have increased. She was certain that those documents held the truth about her uncle's disappearance. What she didn't know was that by touching them, she had moved the first piece in a dangerous game that would change her life forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Night fell over the mansion like a heavy cloak, bringing with it the fine rain that beat against the windows. Emily waited until silence dominated the corridors to examine the documents she had found. Sitting in the small employee's room, she turned on the lamp and removed the envelope from the makeshift hiding place under the mattress. With trembling fingers, she went through the contents, page by page, feeling the textures and trying to understand that puzzle. There was something metallic inside. A flash drive, she realized as she felt it. A useless piece for her who couldn't see its contents, but certainly valuable. The papers contained numbers and signatures, including that of her uncle, Richard. Morgan. He knew something, she murmured to herself as the rain intensified outside. The baby moved in her womb as if responding to her unease. Emily caressed her belly, an instinctive gesture of protection. At that moment, she felt more than ever the responsibility for the life she carried and the danger that the documents represented. The cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. It was Claire, her younger sister. Is everything okay? You didn't call me today. I was worried. Sorry, the day was hectic, Emily responded hesitantly. She wanted to share her discovery, but something stopped her. The less Claire knew, the safer she would be. You sound strange. Did something happen in that mansion? Emily took a deep breath. Claire, do you remember what Mom told us about Uncle Richard before she passed away? A silence followed. On the other end of the line. That he had found irregularities in Anderson's companies, Claire responded, lowering her voice. Why are you remembering this now? Just curious, she lied, deciding not to involve her sister. I need to hang up, I'm tired, we'll talk tomorrow. After ending the call, she put the documents away again and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. The early morning hours dragged on while her mind raced with possibilities. She needed help to understand what she had in her hands. By morning, the movement in the mansion alerted her that something was different. Employees were speaking in tense whispers, interrupting their conversation when she approached. What's happening? She asked Lucy while they prepared breakfast. Mr. Anderson is furious, replied her colleague in a low voice. He said something important disappeared from his office. He's already interrogated half the staff. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Did he mention what exactly? No, but he ordered the rooms to be searched. The security guards are already on the upper floors. At that instant, the deep and controlled voice of Carl Adams, the head of security, sounded near the kitchen door. Emily knew him only by his voice and the characteristic sound of his footsteps. A man of few words, penetrating gaze and unquestionable loyalty to Howard. Miss Morgan, he called, as formal as always. Mr. Anderson requests your presence in his office, immediately. The concerned looks of the other employees burned into her back as she followed Carl through the corridors. The mansion seemed strangely silent, as if holding its breath. Upon entering the office, the woody smell of Howard's cologne hit her. He was sitting in his leather armchair. She could sense, to the silence stretched painfully before he spoke. Emily, do you know why I called you here? His voice sounded soft, almost gentle, which alarmed her even more. No, sir, she replied, keeping her face impassive. Howard stood up. His slow steps circled the desk, approaching her like a predator surrounds its prey. How long have you worked? For me? 5 years. Almost 6, sir. 6 years. Time enough to build trust, don't you think? He stopped behind her, so close that Emily could feel his coffee breath. I've always considered you special, Emily. Your condition was never an impediment to your impeccable work. Emily remained silent, her muscles tense. That's why it surprises me to think that you might have betrayed me. Sir, I would never. Don't lie, his voice exploded, making her retreat. Something was taken from my office, something that only you had access to yesterday. His tone returned to its habitual control, but now carried a clear venom. I'm willing to be generous, Emily. After all, you're pregnant, aren't you? We can resolve this in a civilized manner. Return what you took, and we'll continue as if nothing happened. She felt his hand rest on her shoulder in a gesture that seemed cordial, but hid an unequivocal threat. The pressure gradually increased as he waited for her answer. "Mr. Anderson, there must be some mistake. I didn't take anything from the office," she affirmed, with all the conviction she could muster. Howard's hand slowly slid to her neck, his fingers now pressing with enough force to cause discomfort. "Some people don't know when to stop digging up secrets that don't belong to them," he whispered in her ear. "Your uncle also didn't know." The mention of her uncle made Emily's blood run cold. The confirmation was there in Howard's words, in the pressure of his fingers against her neck. Richard hadn't simply disappeared, he had been silenced. "What happened to my uncle?" she asked, unable to contain herself. Howard's laugh sounded dry without humor. "So you admit that you know something. Interesting." Emily realized her mistake too late. She felt the pressure on her shoulders increase as he led her toward the office balcony. The damp night wind lashed her face when the doors were opened. "Do you know what's down there, Emily?" asked Howard, his voice now dangerously calm. 60 meters of free fall ending in sharp rocks. A tragic accident, wouldn't it be? Especially for a pregnant woman, disoriented by her condition. Panic rose in her throat. Instinctively, Emily brought her hands to her belly, protecting her unborn child. "Please don't do this," she begged, feeling tears burn her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't take any document." "It's too late for negotiations, Emily. You made your choice when you stuck your nose where you shouldn't have." In a moment of desperate lucidity, Emily pretended to stumble, gaining a few seconds to slide her hand to her apron pocket. The envelope wasn't there. She had hidden the documents well in her room, but Howard didn't need to know that. "The papers," she stammered. "They're in my room. I can get them for you." Howard squeezed her arm tightly. "Do you really think—" "I'm that naive. I've already had your room searched and nothing was found." "I hid them in the mattress lining," she lied, desperate. "No one would think to look there." For a moment, Howard hesitated. Emily felt the fleeting chance of survival, but soon the grip on her arm returned. "Carl can verify. As for you, I feel that our professional relationship has come to an end." All happened in seconds. Emily felt Howard's hands on her back, a sudden push, and then emptiness. The cutting wind against her face, her stomach turning with the sensation of falling, her scream echoed off the cliffs. But the direct impact with the rocks never came. Emily's body ricocheted off a rocky ledge before rolling down an inclined stretch, landing violently on a narrow trail that snaked along the slope. The pain was unbearable. Each breath sent waves of agony through her body. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Lying on the damp earth, she tried to move her limbs, fearing the worst for her baby. To her relief, she felt her child move in her womb. "Everything will be all right," she whispered, more to herself than to the baby. The silence of the night was broken by an unexpected sound. Hooves beating against the earth, a low neigh. Emily remained motionless, confused. The warm breath of an animal touched her face, surprising her. "A horse?" she murmured, incredulous. She extended a trembling hand and touched the soft muzzle of the animal. The horse snorted softly as if responding. Emily didn't understand where it had come from. No one in the region kept horses nearby, especially in that remote area of the property. With immense effort, she managed to sit up. Each movement was a battle against pain. She knew she couldn't stay there. Dawn would soon break, and Howard would certainly send someone to confirm that she hadn't survived. Feeling the ground around her, she found a sharp stone and put it in her pocket, an improvised weapon if necessary. Then, using all her strength, she grabbed onto the horse's mane and, with a determination born of desperation, hoisted herself onto the animal. To her surprise, the horse remained patient, as if understanding her fragility. As soon as she settled on its back, the animal began to walk slowly, following a trail that descended the slope, moving away from the mansion. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, clinging to the mane to maintain balance. The night advanced, as the horse continued its way. With each step, the pain diminished Emily's consciousness. She concentrated on staying awake, mentally repeating the name of her yet unborn baby. "Michael, Michael, Michael." After what seemed like an eternity, the scent of the sea intensified. The horse had descended the entire slope and was now walking along a deserted beach. The smell of burning wood alerted Emily to the proximity of some dwelling. The animal stopped. The sound of a creaking door and footsteps in the sand indicated that someone was approaching. Good heavens, what happened? To you, girl. A masculine voice, rough and elderly, broke the silence. Please, was all Emily managed to say before feeling her body slip from the horse. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The smell of fish and salt permeated the clothes of the man holding her. Hold on, I'll take you inside, he said, carrying her with surprising gentleness for his age. The horse, she murmured, concerned about the animal that had saved her. Don't worry about him, that shadow always knows what he's doing. Emily couldn't process the familiarity with which the man referred to the animal. Her consciousness fluctuated as she was carried to what seemed to be a small cottage. My name is Ted Fisher, said the man, laying her on a simple bed. And you, from what I can see, are in serious trouble. The smell of herbs and coffee filled Emily's nostrils when she regained consciousness. It took a few moments to remember where she was and how she had gotten there. The pain persisted, but less intensely, dulled, by some kind of homemade medication. Finally awake, Ted's voice sounded nearby. I was worried, girl. You slept for almost an entire day. Emily tried to sit up, but a sharp pain made her retreat. Easy there, warned Ted. You were lucky not to break anything serious, but you're all bruised. And the baby, my child, exclaimed Emily, bringing her hands to her belly. Seems fine. I felt him moving while I was taking care of you. I have experience with pregnant animals, you know. It's not much different. The comparison made Emily smile weakly, despite the situation. She felt around, trying to form a mental image of the place where she was. It's a simple cottage, explained Ted, noticing her gesture. I've lived here alone for over 30 years. I fish, sell what I can in the village, and survive just fine. Like this, away from the hustle and bustle. Thank you for helping me, she said, but I need to leave soon. He'll look for me. He who? Asked Ted, although his tone indicated that he already suspected the answer. Howard Anderson. A heavy silence settled. Emily could hear only the sound of waves breaking on the beach and the crackling of fire in some type of wood stove. So it was him who did this to you. It wasn't a question. That bastard. The way he pronounced the name indicated that he knew the businessman well. You know him? Asked Emily. Ted sighed deeply before responding. I know more than I'd like to. I worked on his lands before I revolted against certain practices and left, but that was a long time ago. He hesitated, as if measuring his words. You said your name is Emily, right? Emily what? Morgan. Emily Morgan. The sound of something falling to the floor, probably a spoon or kitchen utensil, indicated Ted's surprise. Morgan? Are you related to Richard Morgan? Emily's heart accelerated. He was my uncle. He disappeared 5 years ago. Good Lord, murmured Ted. It's no coincidence you arrived here. What are you talking about? Did you know my uncle? Ted dragged a chair and sat beside the bed. Richard used to visit me sometimes. He was a good man, concerned about what he discovered working for Anderson. Emily grabbed the old man's arm tightly. What did he discover? Please tell me. A huge money laundering scheme. Fraudulent contracts, bribes to politicians. Richard gathered evidence for months, documenting everything. He said he was going to report Howard and his accomplices to the authorities. But he never got to do that. The last time I saw him, he was scared. Said that Howard had discovered what he was doing. Richard hid the original documents in the abandoned lighthouse at Shipwreck Point, an isolated place a few miles from here. I never saw him again after that day. Tears ran down Emily's face as the pieces fit together. I found some documents in Howard's office, she revealed. They had my uncle's name on them. That's why he tried to eliminate me. And where are those documents now? Emily felt a tightness in her chest. Hidden in my room at the mansion, in a secret compartment I made in the baseboard behind the dresser. We need to recover them, affirmed Ted. Impossible. The mansion must be under surveillance. Besides, Howard thinks I'm that I didn't survive. That gives us an advantage, reflected the old man. They're not looking for you, at least not as someone alive. A neigh from outside interrupted the conversation. Shadow is still here, commented Ted with a smile. That horse is special, you know. He appears when someone needs help. He's already saved fishermen lost in storms, children who ventured too far into the forest. Some say he belonged to a farmer who was betrayed and murdered by his business partner. The man's spirit returned in this horse to help innocent people in danger. Under normal circumstances, Emily would consider that an old man's superstition, but after everything she had experienced in the last few hours, nothing seemed impossible anymore. I need to recover those documents and find out what happened. To my uncle, she declared with renewed determination. First you need to recover. Then we'll think about how to proceed. In the days that followed, Emily gradually regained her strength. Ted cared for her with an almost paternal dedication, applying herbal ointments to her wounds and preparing nutritious broths to feed to, as he said. At night, sitting near the fire, they talked about the past. Ted revealed that Richard had mentioned a diary where he recorded everything about Howard's scheme. This diary would be hidden along with other evidence in the abandoned lighthouse. If we can get that diary and combine it with the documents you found, we'll have enough evidence to bring Howard down, said Ted on one of those nights. Emily nodded, determined, but there was a problem that still distressed her. Even if we get this evidence, how do we ensure our safety until justice is done? Howard is powerful, has connections throughout the country. Ted remained silent for a few moments before responding. I have an old friend who works for the FBI. Never sold out, even when they tried to buy him. I can contact him, but we'll need the concrete evidence first. A noise from outside alerted them both. Footsteps were approaching the cottage. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Ted grabbed a harpoon leaning against the wall and signaled for Emily to remain silent. The footsteps were getting closer and closer to the cottage. The wooden floorboards creaked when the old fisherman moved toward the door. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice firm despite his age. "It's me, Carl Adams," replied a male voice that made Emily freeze in fear. "I need to speak with Emily Morgan. I know she's in there." Ted looked at Emily, who slowly nodded, recognizing the voice of Howard's head of security. "Is he alone?" she whispered. "Seems so," responded Ted after listening carefully. "But it could be a trap." "I'm not armed," declared Carl, as if he could hear the conversation, "and I came alone. Howard doesn't know I'm here." After a few seconds of hesitation, Ted unlocked the door, keeping the harpoon in position. Carl entered, hands raised in a sign of surrender. His eyes scanned the simple cottage until they found Emily, sitting on the bed. "Thank God you're alive," he said, with genuine relief. That surprised everyone, including himself. "How did you find me?" asked Emily, suspicious. Carl slowly lowered his hands, aware of the harpoon pointed at his chest. "I followed the horse's tracks. There are stories about him in the region. When we discovered that your body wasn't where it should be after a fall, I suspected that Shadow might have found you." "And you came to finish the job?" questioned Ted harshly. "No," Carl shook his head. "I came to warn her, and maybe help." Silence weighed in the environment as Emily and Ted processed that unexpected declaration. "Why would you help a domestic employee against your boss?" asked Emily, still skeptical. Carl sighed, suddenly seeming tired and older than his 40-something. "Years. I've worked for Howard for 15 years. I've seen things." He hesitated, choosing his words. "I've done things that haunt me, but it never went as far as this time. Trying to kill a pregnant woman." His eyes diverted to Emily's belly. He crossed a line that I can't ignore. "How can we trust you?" questioned Ted, still holding the harpoon. Carl put his hand in his pocket, making Ted tense, but he only took out a small envelope. "I found this in your hiding place behind the dresser. Howard ordered the room to be thoroughly searched after you disappeared." Emily extended her hand, trembling slightly upon recognizing the envelope through touch. "I didn't tell him about the documents," continued Carl. "I said I found nothing." "Why?" Emily's voice was almost a whisper. "Because I saw Richard Morgan's name there, and I know what happened to him." Emily held her breath. "My uncle." "He didn't suffer," said Carl, with a tone suggesting that was the maximum comfort he could offer. "He discovered Howard's scheme, gathered evidence, and planned to report him. Howard confronted him. There was a fight. It was quick." Silent tears ran down Emily's face. The confirmation of her suspicions brought no relief, only pain. "And you were there?" asked Ted, his voice loaded with judgment. "No. I found out. Afterward. I helped cover it up, and that has haunted me ever since." Carl walked to the window, looking at the black horse that grazed peacefully outside. "Howard is desperate now. He knows you might have discovered something, and fears you might have shared it with someone. He ordered his men to search the entire region, including this stretch of beach. They'll be here soon. We need to go to the lighthouse," said Emily suddenly. "My uncle hid evidence there." Carl nodded, turning to them. "I suspected there might be more. Richard was methodical. He wouldn't trust in just one set of evidence." "And why should we trust that you'll take us there safely?" challenged Ted. "Because I'm also in danger now," responded Carl with a bitter smile. "Howard has started to watch me closely. I think he suspects my loyalty. If he discovers I'm helping you, my fate will be the same as Richard's." A heavy silence hung over the cottage. The sound of waves breaking on the beach and Shadow's occasional neigh were the only perceptible noises. "How much time do we have before Howard's men get here?" asked Emily finally. "A few hours at most. They're checking the northern area first." Emily took a deep breath, placing one hand on her belly and the other on the envelope. "Ted, we need to go to the lighthouse, now." The old fisherman studied Carl for a few seconds, as if trying to see through him. Finally, he lowered the harpoon. "I'll prepare supplies. The walk isn't easy, especially for someone in your condition." "The horse can take her," suggested Carl. "Ted and I will follow on foot." While Ted gathered provisions and Carl observed the horizon for signs of approach, Emily opened the envelope, confirming that all the documents were there. Among them, there was a photo she hadn't seen before. Her uncle next to Howard, both smiling at some social event. The image contrasted cruelly with the fate that Richard had met. "I will bring you justice, Uncle." "I promise," she whispered, putting the envelope away again. Half an hour later, they were ready to depart. The sky was beginning to darken, dense clouds announcing an approaching storm. Shadow remained patient as Ted helped Emily mount. "The lighthouse is about 3 miles from here, following the coast," explained Ted. "There's a narrow trail at the top of the cliffs. It's our best route, away from the main roads that Howard is certainly watching." As they moved away from the cottage, Emily felt a mix of fear and determination. The sea breeze carried the harbinger of rain, and her child moved in her womb, as if sensing her agitation. A single certainty pulsed in her mind. There was no turning back. The first raindrops began to fall when the group spotted the shipwrecked Point Lighthouse in the distance. The abandoned structure rose above a rocky promontory, battered by time and the elements, but still imposing against the stormy sky. Its white tower, faded to a pale grey, contrasted with the dark clouds. "It's getting dangerous," warned Carl, observing the increasing intensity of the rain. "These trails get slippery quickly." Shadow advanced carefully, choosing his steps with a caution that seemed almost human. Emily clung to the horse's mane, the rain cape borrowed from Ted offering little protection against the intensifying storm. "How? Much farther?" she asked, her wet hair sticking to her face. "We're almost there," replied Ted. 10 more minutes at this pace." A flash, followed by the rumble of thunder, made Shadow neigh, startled. Emily calmed him with soft words, caressing his wet neck. "You're a good boy," she whispered. "Just a little bit more." Carl walked slightly ahead, alert. His behavior still caused distrust in Ted, who kept his eyes on him. Suddenly, Carl raised, his hand signaling them to stop. "What is it?" asked Ted, tense. "I heard something," replied Carl, his voice low. "Wait here." He advanced alone a few meters, disappearing among the bushes that bordered the trail. Ted approached Emily, his hand discreetly holding the knife in his pocket. "If he betrayed us." "I don't think he did," interrupted Emily. "He seemed sincere." Carl returned minutes later, his face grave. "Howard's men," he informed. "Two of them, checking the trail that leads to the lighthouse." "How did they know where we were going?" questioned Emily, alarmed. "They didn't. They're searching everywhere. Howard must have ordered a complete search of the region." Ted looked at the sky, calculating the time. "There's an alternative trail, steeper, on the east side. It's more work but less visible." "I can handle them," offered Carl. "You go ahead via the detour." "And how will we know you won't alert them about our location?" challenged Ted. Carl stared at the old man for a long moment. "I won't, but I understand your distrust. It's deserved." He took the gun from his holster and handed it to Ted, which caught the fisherman by surprise. "I'll be unarmed. If I try anything, you know what to do." Ted took the gun reluctantly and nodded. "Meet us at the lighthouse," said Emily. "Be careful." Carl moved away, descending the trail toward the men. Ted guided Emily and Shadow to the alternative path, narrower and covered by dense vegetation. The rain had transformed into a real deluge. Shadow advanced with difficulty, and more than once, Emily feared they would slip on the wet rocks. "It hurts," she said suddenly, one hand on her belly. Ted looked worried. "The baby?" "It must be just the exertion," she replied, breathing deeply. "Let's continue." After an arduous climb, they finally reached the plateau where the lighthouse stood. The wind was even stronger there, lashing the weathered walls of the century-old construction. "Let's go inside," said Ted, helping Emily dismount. "You need to rest." The interior of the lighthouse was surprisingly preserved. The ground floor contained a circular room with some abandoned furniture, a table, dusty chairs, a cabinet leaning against the wall. "Where would Richard hide the documents?" asked Emily, catching her breath. "I know your uncle," replied Ted. "He loved puzzles and codes. He wouldn't leave things in plain sight." Emily concentrated, trying to imagine where her uncle would have hidden such precious information. Her fingers slid along the stone walls, feeling the cracks and imperfections. "The spiral staircase," she suggested, pointing to the metal structure that rose to the lighthouse lantern. "We need to check up there." Ted hesitated. "I don't know if it's safe for you to climb in your condition." "I have no choice," she replied, determined. "Let's go." The metal steps were corroded by constant exposure to the sea air. They creaked dangerously under their feet as they climbed slowly, Ted right behind Emily to support her if necessary. The lantern room was a circular space with thick glass windows all around, many of them broken, allowing the wind and rain to enter freely. The long-abandoned light mechanism dominated the center of the space, covered in rust and bird droppings. "It's here," murmured Emily, as if feeling her uncle's presence. Ted examined the place, checking loose boards, cracks in the walls, any space that could serve as a hiding place. "I don't see anything obvious," he commented, frustrated. Emily closed her eyes, concentrating. Suddenly an idea occurred to her. The lantern, the central mechanism. Ted approached the oxidized structure, examining it carefully. "You're right. Look at this." He pointed to a small compartment in the base of the mechanism, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. "It looks like it was recently disturbed." With some effort, he managed to open the compartment. Inside was a small metal box, sealed against moisture. Ted carefully removed it and handed it to Emily, who opened it with trembling fingers. The contents made her heart race. A flash drive protected by a waterproof casing, a small voice recorder, and a leather-bound notebook, Richard's diary. "We've got it," she whispered, opening the diary. Her fingers ran over the pages covered by her uncle's firm handwriting. Ted took the recorder and pressed the play button. Richard Morgan's voice, clear and resolute, filled the room. "My name is Richard Morgan. If someone is listening to this recording, I'm probably no longer alive. I worked as the chief accountant for Howard Anderson for 8 years, and during that time I discovered a corruption and money laundering scheme that involves politicians, judges, and high-ranking businessmen. All the details, names, and amounts are documented in this flash drive and in the diary that accompanies this recording. I have reason to believe my life is in danger. If something happens to me, The responsibility lies with Howard Anderson. Silent. Tears ran down Emily's face as the recording continued, detailing the criminal scheme her uncle had discovered. His voice, which she hadn't heard in years, was like a ghost materialized in the damp air of the lighthouse. A noise on the stairs interrupted the moment. Ted immediately drew the gun that Carl had given him, pointing it at the entrance to the room. "It's me," announced Carl, appearing at the top of the stairs, soaked and with a superficial cut on his forehead. "I managed to throw Howard's men. Off track, but not for long. We need to get out of here." His eyes fell on the items Emily was holding. "You found them?" "Yes," she confirmed, putting everything back in the metal box. "All we need to bring Howard down." Carl nodded, but his face remained tense. "There's a bigger problem. Howard is coming personally. I heard it on the security guard's radio. He should arrive in less than an hour." Emily and Ted exchanged alarmed looks. "We need a plan," said Emily, her mind working quickly. "And I think I have one." The storm raged with renewed fury, transforming the afternoon sky into premature darkness. Inside the lighthouse, illuminated only by the lantern Ted carried, the trio finalized the details of Emily's plan. "It's too risky," protested Carl after hearing the proposal. "He won't hesitate to eliminate all of us if he gets the chance." "That's exactly why it has to be this way," insisted Emily. "Howard only understands one language, power and control. We have to make him believe he's still in command." She hugged the metal box against her chest, feeling the weight of the truths contained there. The baby moved in her womb, as if supporting her determination. "What if he realizes it's a trap?" questioned Ted, the skepticism evident in his voice. "That's why you two need to leave here now," replied Emily, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. "Carl, can you take Ted and the evidence to safety?" The security guard nodded slowly. "I know an alternative route on the west side. Few people know about it. I can ensure we'll reach town without being intercepted." "I won't leave you here alone," protested Ted, indignant. Emily took the old man's hands in hers, squeezing them with affection. "You've already done more for me than I could ask. Now I need you to do one more thing. Take this evidence to your friend at the FBI. It's the only way to ensure Howard pays for everything he did. And meanwhile, you'll surrender yourself to him as bait. I can't allow that." "It's not a question of allowing," she said gently. "It's the only option we have. Howard came personally because he wants to make sure there's no information leak. If you two disappear with the evidence while he's looking for me, we'll gain valuable time." Carl, who was watching through the broken lighthouse window, interrupted the discussion. "Headlights approaching, 3 vehicles at least." Time was running out. Emily pushed the box into Ted's hands. "Go, now." After a moment of hesitation, Ted reluctantly nodded. He hugged Emily tightly, like a father saying goodbye to his daughter. "Be careful, girl. Your child needs you alive." "I know," she smiled, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "We'll meet again soon." Carl approached, handing her a small object. "A tracker," he explained. "Activate it when you're with Howard. We'll be able to track you." Emily put the device in her pocket, grateful for the security guard's foresight. "Don't trust him completely," warned Ted in a final moment. "Howard has a way of corrupting people." "Not this time," promised Carl, with a determination that surprised everyone. When the two went down the back stairs, Emily remained alone in the lantern room. She took a deep breath, trying to control the fear that threatened to dominate her. She remembered the words her uncle always said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." Outside, the headlights of the cars cut through the darkness, approaching the lighthouse. Emily carefully descended the spiral staircase, strategically positioning herself on the ground floor. If her plan worked, she would buy enough time for Ted and Carl to deliver the evidence to the authorities. The lighthouse door opened violently, pushed by the wind or by impatient hands. Howard Anderson entered first, followed by 2 armed men. He was impeccably dressed, as always, although his face betrayed the tension he felt. His eyes widened in surprise at seeing her standing there, calm and composed. "Emily," he said quickly, regaining his composure, "I must admit I'm impressed by your resilience. "Hello, Mr. Anderson," she replied, with a calmness she didn't feel. "I was expecting you." Howard made a gesture, and the security guards positioned themselves, blocking the exit. "Expecting me?" he asked, his eyebrow arched in curiosity. "That's unexpected. I thought you would be desperately fleeing." "What for?" "You would find me anyway," she replied, with a slight shrug. "Besides, I have a proposal to make." A cold smile formed on Howard's lips. A proposal? Coming from a domestic employee who should be missing, like my Uncle Richard, she completed. The mention of the name made Howard's smile disappear. "Careful. Emily, you're in an extremely precarious position to make provocations." "It's not a provocation, it's a negotiation," she corrected. "You want something I have, and I'm willing to give it to you, for the right price." The businessman studied her for a few seconds, intrigued. "And what would you have that could interest me?" "The documents my uncle hid," she promptly replied. "All of them. The diary, the flash drive, the recording, everything he gathered against you over the years." A shadow of concern crossed Howard's face. "You found them?" "Yes. And I imagined you would pay well to get them back. Let's say enough for me to start over somewhere else with my child, far from here." Howard walked slowly around her, like a predator evaluating its prey. "I've always underestimated you, Emily. I thought you were just a naive girl, incapable due to your condition. But there's a calculating mind behind those eyes that don't... See?" He came closer, his woody cologne invading her nostrils. "Where are the documents?" "Safe," she replied. "And they'll only be delivered when I'm far from here, with guarantees that we'll be left in peace, my child and I. And why would I agree to that, when I can simply make you tell me where they are?" The threatening tone didn't go unnoticed. Emily maintained a firm posture. "Because I made an arrangement. If anything happens to me, the evidence will be automatically sent to the authorities. It's a life insurance policy, so to speak." The lie flowed easily, fueled by the desperate need for survival. Howard stared at her for a long time, evaluating the truthfulness of her words. Finally, he let out a short laugh, almost admiring. "Richard would be proud. You have the same blood, the same obstinacy." He walked to the window, observing the storm that battered the landscape. "I suppose we can reach an agreement," he said. "At last. But no money in advance. You take me to the documents, I verify that everything is there, and then we make the transfer. After that, you have my word that you can leave the country without interference." "Your word?" Emily couldn't contain the sarcasm. "Forgive me if I don't consider that very valuable." Howard turned to her, his eyes cold. "It's the only guarantee you'll have. Take it or leave it." Emily knew she was walking on thin ice, but she needed to buy more time. "I need more than words. I want a written agreement, signed by your lawyer, guaranteeing total immunity for me and my family." "That can be arranged," Howard agreed, surprisingly. "But first, let's recover what belongs to me. Where are the documents?" "They're not here," she replied. "They're in a safe place where only I can access them." "Then you'll come with me now," he declared. "My men will accompany us to this safe place." Emily nodded slowly. "As you wish." At that moment, the tracker weighed in her pocket like a small flame of hope. All she needed to do was keep Howard distracted long enough for justice to reach them. "We'll leave for Dallas today," decided Howard, surprising her. "I have pending business there. It will be safer to finalize our agreement, far from here, where no one can interfere." The mention of Dallas made Emily's heart leap. It was perfect for her plan. The farther Howard was from the mansion and his local connections, the more vulnerable he would be when the authorities reached him. "Dallas," she repeated, feigning concern. "I don't know if I can travel in this state." "You'll have all the necessary comfort in my private jet," he assured her. "We'll depart as soon as we recover the documents." Emily realized she had no choice. She needed to continue the charade to the end. "All right," she agreed. "Let's get what you want." The luxurious SUVs cut through the road back to the Anderson mansion, high beams tearing through the darkness of the stormy night. Emily was in the back seat of the main car, next to Howard, who never took his eyes off her. His hands drummed on the leather briefcase in his lap, betraying his impatience. "I must admit, Emily, you've always surprised me," commented Howard, breaking the tense silence. "Few realize how people with disabilities can be extremely observant. You listened to everything, felt everything, while everyone underestimated you." "I learned early on that people reveal more when they think I'm not paying attention," she replied, maintaining the outer calm that contrasted with her racing heart. The driver announced they were approaching the mansion. Emily discreetly adjusted her position, reaching for the small tracker in her pocket. With an imperceptible movement, she activated it. "When we arrive, we'll go directly to my office," instructed Howard. "You'll give me the documents. We'll sign the agreement, and soon we'll be on our way to Dallas. By this time tomorrow, this unpleasant incident will be just a distant memory." Emily nodded, pretending to agree. Through the window, she could sense that the storm was beginning to subside, as if nature too was awaiting the outcome of this story. The car finally stopped in front of the mansion, its lights shining against the darkness. The sensation of returning to that place, where she had almost lost her life, made Emily tremble slightly. She remembered what Ted had said before they separated. Stay strong until the last moment. The truth always finds its way. The security guard opened the door, and Howard's hand on her elbow guided her out. The rain was now just a fine drizzle, and the wind had considerably diminished. "Not long now," whispered Howard, leading her. Up the main entrance steps. Dorothy, the housekeeper, was in the hall, visibly surprised to see Emily. Her aged face paled as if she were seeing a ghost. "Sir?" she murmured, confused. "Everything's fine, Dorothy," Howard reassured with false cordiality. "Emily is helping us resolve a small misunderstanding. Bring coffee to the office, please." As they climbed the staircase, Emily noticed that the mansion was strangely silent, with few employees in sight. Howard had probably dismissed most of them to minimize witnesses. The office remained exactly as she remembered, the smell of fine wood, old books, and Howard's characteristic cologne. The balcony, now closed due to the rain, brought painful memories that she struggled to push away. "So, Emily," began Howard, sitting in his leather armchair, "where are the documents?" She took a deep breath, calculating each word. "First, I need guarantees, the agreement you mentioned." Howard smiled, opening a drawer and removing an already prepared document. "It's all here. Total immunity, a generous amount for your fresh start, and the guarantee that we'll never see each other again." "You already had this ready," she observed, suspicious. "I always come prepared for negotiations," he replied, extending the paper. "I could read it to you, but I imagine you prefer to verify it yourself." Emily accepted the document, her fingers sliding over the pages in search of legal traps. To her surprise, the agreement seemed genuine. Clear terms, specified values, security guarantees. Howard really believed he could resolve everything with money and empty promises. "It seems adequate," she said finally. "Excellent. Now the documents." Emily adjusted herself in the chair, buying time. "They're not here in the mansion." Howard's smile disappeared. "That wasn't part of the deal. They're in a safe place, as I said, sent to be kept by someone I trust." At that moment, Dorothy entered with the coffee, interrupting the growing tension. She placed the tray on the desk and withdrew quickly, not without first casting a concerned look at Emily. Howard waited for the door to close before continuing, his voice now loaded with threat. "You're playing with fire, Emily. Would this someone you trust be Carl Adams, because he curiously didn't show up for work today?" Emily's heart accelerated, but she maintained a neutral expression. "I don't know what you're talking about. I never had contact with your security guard." "Don't lie to me," exploded Howard, slamming the desk. "My men saw you together at the lighthouse. You, Carl, and that old fisherman." It was a lie. His men hadn't seen anything, but Howard hoped that surprise would betray her. Emily, however, just smiled calmly. "If you already knew that, why did you bring me here? Why didn't you eliminate me at the lighthouse?" The question momentarily disarmed Howard. "Because I need those documents," he admitted, losing his composure. "Everything else can be worked around, but that evidence, especially Richard's recording, I can't allow it to surface." A slight noise, almost imperceptible, caught Emily's attention. Her sound she knew well, the tick-tock of the large clock in the entrance hall, audible through the partially open door. The sound seemed louder than normal, as if amplified. "You know what my uncle used to say, Mr. Anderson?" she asked with a tranquility that was now genuine. "That truth is like water. It always finds a way to come to the surface." Howard's face contorted in fury. "Enough games. Where are the documents?" "Very close to you, actually," she replied, tilting her head toward the partially open office door. Howard followed her gaze, confused. The clock sound was, indeed, strangely loud. He approached the door and opened it completely. The hall was full of FBI officers, led by a tall man in a somber suit. Dorothy was beside him, as were other mansion employees. "Howard Anderson," announced the man, presenting a badge. "I'm Agent Thomas Mitchell. You're under arrest for corruption, money, laundering, and attempted murder." Howard's face transformed into a mask of disbelief. "This is absurd. You have no proof of anything." "On the contrary," replied the agent, "we have all the necessary evidence, including your confession transmitted live." He pointed to the clock. In the hall, where a small camera had been skillfully installed, transmitting the entire conversation in the office. Emily rose slowly, walking toward the door with Dorothy's help, who had approached to support her. "The original documents are already with the authorities, Mr. Anderson," she explained. "The flash drive, the diary, the recording, everything. What you saw was just the beginning of your fall." "You—" Howard advanced toward her, but was immediately restrained by two officers. As he was handcuffed, he vociferated threats and accusations that echoed through the corridors of the mansion. Emily remained calm, knowing that it was finally over. Ted appeared at her side, squeezing her hand in a gesture of pride and relief. "You did it, girl. Richard would be very proud." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." Carl appeared soon, after accompanied by Agent Mitchell. "Your courage saved many lives, Miss Morgan," said the agent. "The scheme we dismantled involves powerful figures across the country. Your uncle started this fight, and you finished it." "What will happen now?" she asked. "Howard and his accomplices will face justice. As for you, we offer protection until the trial. Afterward, you'll be free to rebuild your life wherever you want." Months passed. The Anderson mansion, once a symbol of power and opulence, now remained closed, awaiting judicial decision. Howard was in preventive detention, while his empire crumbled with new revelations emerging daily. Emily returned to Newport, no longer as an employee, but as the owner of a small house on the hillside, overlooking the sea. The money from the compensation and the reward offered by the government allowed her to start a new life. On a sunny spring afternoon, she sat on the porch, cradling her newborn son. Michael, just 2 months old, had the same delicate features of his mother's face. "Is he sleeping?" asked Ted, approaching with a tray of coffee. "Yes, finally," she smiled, adjusting the little one in her arms. The old fisherman had become a constant presence, a kind of surrogate grandfather for Michael. Carl also appeared occasionally, bringing news of the case's developments and helping with home repairs. A familiar neigh made Emily smile. "Is Shadow still around?" "As always," confirmed Ted. "He stays in the surroundings, grazing peacefully. Seems like he found his true home." The black horse, mysterious as always, had become a kind of silent guardian of the property. He appeared and disappeared according to his will, but never completely moved away. "You know, Ted," commented Emily thoughtfully, "sometimes I wonder what my uncle would say if he were here." The old man sat beside her, contemplating the marine horizon. He would say that truth always finds its way, even in the densest shadows. "And that you, Emily, were the light that illuminated that path." She smiled, feeling the sea breeze caress her face. The past, with its pains and losses, was not forgotten, but now served only as the foundation for a future that finally belonged solely to her and her son. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Emily knew that her life, like that magnificent sunset, was just beginning.